Christmas morning settled over the house with its usual quiet grace, the kind that holds memories in the frost on the windows and the scent of pine lingering in the air. I stood near the window, watching the pale light soften the snow outside, while inside the familiar rhythms of holiday preparation unfolded around me. The tree stood tall and proud, its ornaments catching tiny sparks of sunlight. The dining table was set with care, each plate placed just so, holding the weight of decades of tradition. But the scene before me was fractured. Mark lounged lazily in an armchair, his wife beside him, neither paying attention to the decorations or the warmth that should have filled this room. The carefully crafted festivities, the garland I hung, the turkey slow roasting in the oven, the soft carols threading through the house, were dismissed with casual disregard. "Dad, we're not doing this year," Mark said, his voice flat and final when I approached. "Not doing what?" I asked, masking the sting behind a steady tone. "This Christmas," he said, eyes never leaving the television, "I'm spending it with my mother-in-law." The words hit me harder than the December chill outside. A knot tightened deep in my chest. "Your mother-in-law?" I repeated, incredulous. "Yeah, she's unwell," Mark shrugged, as if that ended the conversation. I searched his face, trying to find traces of the son I once knew, eager, kind, appreciative, but found only cold distance. The boy who used to marvel at ornaments and beg for extra servings was gone. Later, in the quiet kitchen, the phone rang. It was Mark's wife. "Walter, we've taken her to Hawaii. The change might help." Hawaii, the word echoed hollowly in the silence. They'd whisked her away without a word, breaking more than routine. They broke the trust we'd built over time. My hands gripped the counter, nails pressing into the wood, anchoring me as shock burned through. The warmth of years feels suddenly like a fraud. The house felt emptier than ever. The twinkling lights on the tree seemed unsure whether to glow or fade, much like the hope I'd carried into this morning. I sank into the armchair, the fabric cool beneath my fingers, silence pressing around me. But my mind churned. The sting of betrayal mixed with the insistence of resolve. I was wounded but not defeated. The engineer inside me, practiced in problem-solving and patient calculation, took hold. The family I had supported through endless sacrifices, the nights working overtime so Mark could have the life he wanted, the mortgage I took on with hope for our future, deserved more than this mutiny of indifference. They might have forsaken tradition today, but I would reclaim respect. My thoughts sharpened, mapping possibilities, weighing emotions against cold fact. This wasn't just a Christmas disrupted. It was a fracture of loyalty and trust that demanded redress. They might have forsaken tradition today, but I would reclaim respect. My thoughts sharpened, mapping possibilities, weighing emotions against cold fact. This wasn't just a Christmas disrupted. It was a fracture of loyalty and trust that demanded redress. I stood, each movement deliberate, heart steeling against the ache. Outside, the snow softened the world. Inside, a quiet determination began to stir. I had built a family home with sweat and patience. Now, I would build justice in its stead, measured, careful, and unyielding. The day might have started with betrayal, but it would not end without reckoning. The silence that followed Christmas morning stretched long and heavy through the house, settling around me like a thick fog. The stillness wasn't just absence of noise, it was the absence of warmth, the absence of family. I sat in my study, surrounded by the quiet authority of books and the soft ticking of an old clock that had witnessed decades of change. In that stillness, memories arose, sharp and clear, each one a reminder of everything I had sacrificed so that my family might thrive. I thought back to the countless nights spent at the drafting table, poring over blueprints while the rest of the world slept.
The late hours weren't a burden because I believed in what I built. Not just machines and structures, but a foundation for my family's future. I worked overtime so Mark could attend the best schools, so Maria could fulfill her dreams, so the house we lived in could be more than walls and a roof. It could be a sanctuary. How strange it was then to sit alone in the quiet and feel every sacrifice twisting into something unfamiliar. Doubt. Was it all in vain? Had my efforts become debts they felt entitled to collect without gratitude? The mortgage papers haunted me, crisp and official. I had signed each one with the hope of securing more than just shelter. I had intended to create a legacy, a place stitched with memories and sacrifices. Every floorboard creaked softly beneath my feet, each one a reminder of the years invested. I closed my eyes and was transported back to a Christmas not so long ago, the table groaning under the weight of roasted turkey and festive dishes.
The room alive with laughter and joyous chatter. Mark, young and eager, had been the one to place the mistletoe above the doorway, his innocent excitement contagious. Maria's smile lasted all evening, warm and proud as she passed me a slice of pie, whispering that these moments were what family was made of. Those memories were a stark contrast to the cold neglect I face today. What I once saw as love and loyalty had been quietly replaced by apathy. The betrayal was not loud or violent, it was quiet and sharp, the more dangerous kind because it undermines without warning. No shouted accusations, only silence and absence where trust once lived. I reflected on how Mark had shifted from the boy I nurtured to the man who carelessly dismissed years of devotion. Had he come to believe that love was something owed rather than earned? Did he think respect was a given, a right, rather than a mutual bond? I studied the photographs lining the walls. Mark's graduation, Maria's wedding, smiles frozen in time. They felt like relics from a different life, a past I was no longer a part of. The sting of betrayal threatened to drown me in despair, but I fought it back. Years of experience had taught me that despair solves nothing. I was an engineer by trade, trained to analyze, to deconstruct complex systems into parts, and to rebuild them better. Now, I needed to apply that same logic to my fractured family. I began sorting through mental inventories. The sacrifices I had made, Mark's increasing distance, the erosion of respect that had led us here. Each fact added weight to a growing determination. I thought about every late night at the office, every penny stretched to cover tuition and bills, every meal prepared with love despite fatigue. Each had been part of a blueprint for a future I believed in. I resolved that this blueprint wasn't ruined, it needed adjusting, redrawing the lines to account for this breach. I recalled the stacks of documents on my desk, mortgage papers, bank statements, contracts, all the tangible proof of my role as the family's anchor. These papers were more than ink on parchment. They were shields, weapons, and tools all in one. I understood that my response couldn't be fueled by anger or rash impulses. Instead, it required careful, measured action. The skills that had served me in my career, patience, precision, steadfastness, would now guide me in this fight. It wasn't a battle of brute strength or spite, but one of intellect and endurance, the very way I had always lived and worked. The legacy I wanted to leave was clearer now than ever. It was not about revenge for revenge's sake, but about restoring balance and respect, about teaching that loyalty must be cultivated, not assumed. With deliberate focus, I reached for my journal, the leather cover worn and familiar beneath my hand. Blank pages invited my resolve. The text started to write down everything: the debts unpaid, the respect forsaken, the principles broken. I sketched a plan, step by step, carefully layered as any engineer might map out a project. Every friend I'd made over the years, each trusted lawyer and accountant who knew the intricacies of our affairs, they would be my allies. Knowledge and preparation would be my greatest weapons. Hours slipped by as I pored over every detail. The faint glow of the desk lamp cast long shadows, but within me a light kindled. The sacrifices of the past would no longer be forgotten or dismissed. They were the foundation from which I would rise to claim justice. I was no longer the man who had quietly endured. I was becoming the strategist, a guardian of legacy, a seeker of truth. The road ahead was long and difficult, but I was ready for what came next. The past was a set of memories to guide me. The future was a challenge I would meet head-on. And in that resolve, I found a measure of peace. The quiet resolve I had cultivated in the solitude of my study soon gave way to something sharper, a clarity that pierced through the haze of hurt and nostalgia. I needed more than memories and intentions. I needed facts. Hard evidence that would reveal the full extent of Mark's disregard for the responsibilities etched into our family's shared legacy. It was time to look deeper, not just at emotions, but at the cold documents, the legal papers, the financial statements that could no longer be ignored. One evening, after the house had fallen into a deep sleep, I found myself at my desk again, this time pulling out files I hadn't revisited for years. Tax records, property titles, bank statements, contracts. Each sheet was a veneer over years of silent stewardship, and my breath caught as I began to see patterns emerging in the numbers. Mark had slipped past his duties with astonishing ease. I discovered signs of negligence, documents left unsigned, financial obligations ignored. Worse still, there were discrepancies, altered figures, hastily amended terms, details that suggested calculated deception. I felt a cold surge of betrayal ignite anew. It was no longer just a matter of familial neglect, but an outright attempt to undermine me, to claim control through dishonesty. One document stood out among the rest, a transfer of property rights supposedly executed with my consent, but the signatures were suspiciously inconsistent. A forged signature, my name traced shakily as if by someone who had never held a pen in earnest. The thought tightened a fist around my chest. Mark's reckless ambition had evolved into outright sabotage, and the very family home, the symbol of my sacrifices, was now at risk. The place built with my hands and my integrity was being used like a pawn in a game I hadn't agreed to play. I sat back, the weight of this realization heavy but fueling my resolve. I remembered the lessons from my years in engineering. When a structure shows signs of failure, the only option is to diagnose the flaws with exacting precision and reinforce the foundation before collapse. This corruption needed exposure. Justice demanded methodical action. I reached out to my attorney, a steady hand from years past, and began consulting, laying out every troubling detail. I wasn't just a wronged father anymore. I was a man who had to protect a legacy against those who saw it as their personal entitlement. The phone conversations with my lawyer were terse but thorough. I shared the evidence I had uncovered and listened intently as she explained the legal avenues open to me: audits, title disputes, and potential financial investigations. The path ahead was complicated but straightforward. Mark had left cracks. I intended to pry them open and let the light in. At the same time, I reached out quietly to an old friend from the bank, a confidant who knew the intricacies of our family's accounts and financial history. Together, we pored over statements, tracking suspicious transactions and hidden debts. It became clear that Mark and his wife had been living well beyond their declared means, leveraging family assets irresponsibly and using debt to mask depletion. With every revelation, my grief swelled, but so did my determination. This wasn't about vengeance, it was about justice, fairness restored to the family I had once thought inviolable. I recalled how, years ago, I had painstakingly calculated every expense to provide for their futures. Now those calculations were being twisted by unchecked greed. At night, I lay awake, crafting a mental blueprint, not for a building, but for a strategy. Every move had to be deliberate, financial constraints imposed, legal rights asserted, resources reclaimed. No impulsive moves, no angry outbursts, just cold, precise steps forward. I imagined a timeline of actions, each one designed to pressure without exposing vulnerability. I was aware that Mark would resist. Entitlement breeds desperation. I prepared for denial, for anger, even deceit on his part. But I was no longer the man who endured blindly. My reflection in the mirror revealed the shifts within me. Where once there was wounded patience, now stood a calm strategist. Where hurt had once threatened to overwhelm, discipline reigned. The house that had felt empty now echoed with purpose. I thought back to the many family dinners, the laughter mingling like sweet wine, the promises whispered under soft lighting. Those moments were not lost. They were my guideposts, reminding me that respect and responsibility were the pillars I needed to rebuild. Late one evening, I confronted Mark directly. I called him, voice steady yet firm. "We need to talk." He responded with irritation, a thin veil over something more volatile. "What now, Dad?" I laid out the facts without accusation, truths unassailable and precise. I've found inconsistencies in financial documents, changes to property ownership without my knowledge. These are serious breaches. His defenses rose quickly, but I remained composed, refusing to be baited into a confrontation. I told him that if these matters were not resolved, I would be forced to take legal steps. There was silence, heavy and thick. That call marked a turning point, not just for him, but for me. I moved forward with measured intent, enlisting professional help, gathering more evidence, preparing for the inevitable fight to uphold what was rightfully mine. Each day I grew more confident, not in a reckless sense, but with the quiet assurance of one who has meticulously studied every variable. This was not merely personal. It was a matter of principle, making sure that years of sacrifice would not be trampled by youthful entitlement. I was ready to reclaim control, not with anger, but with intellect, to restore balance and honor the trust I had once placed in Mark. The battle ahead was daunting, but for the first time since that cold Christmas morning, I felt a flame of hope. I was no longer a passive victim, but a man who knew his direction. And with that knowledge, I stepped deeper into the fight for the family's future. Each day unfurled with a steady, unrelenting purpose, a cadence shaped by countless hours spent poring over documents and calculating strategies rather than drafting blueprints or solving engineering problems. The skills honed from decades of meticulous design and patient troubleshooting guided me now through a labyrinth far more personal and treacherous, the tangled web of betrayal and financial mismanagement woven by the son I had raised. I leaned heavily on the expertise of a few trusted allies, an old friend at the bank who understood the intricacies behind the numbers, seasoned lawyers with experience untangling family disputes, forensic accountants skilled at exposing hidden flows of money. Together, we assembled a detailed map of Mark's tangled financial affairs, the debts he had accumulated in secret, the loans taken without my knowledge, the reckless spending masked by loosely controlled joint accounts. It was a revelation, both painful and galvanizing, to see the extent of their disregard. The family home, my sanctuary, built with the sweat of my brow and the patience of my soul, was mortgaged within inches of collapse, leveraged by debts accumulated to fund lifestyles I had never agreed to provide. The paper trails I uncovered were evidence not just of financial mismanagement, but of a betrayal so deep it felt like a knife twisting inside me. I remember sitting long into the night, surrounded by stacks of bank statements and loan documents, tracing ever more convoluted financial maneuvers. Each irregularity felt like a fracture in the foundation of everything I'd built, and yet
Every fragment of evidence further stoked the quiet fire of resolution burning within me. I applied the same methodical approach I'd used on engineering projects, breaking down the complexity into manageable problems, isolating weaknesses, planning carefully calculated moves. This time, my tools were legal petitions and financial restrictions, audits and property claims. I began by cutting access to family funds with surgical precision. Credit cards connected to joint accounts were quietly canceled, bank privileges revoked with a subtlety designed to avoid immediate conflict but ensure real impact. My financial team quietly flagged all suspicious transactions for further scrutiny, initiating audits that would ripple through their financial world. Every move was deliberate and measured. The goal was to apply pressure that would slowly undermine their complacency without opening myself to reckless counterattack. The property titles associated with the house and other assets occupied my attention next. The forged documents I'd uncovered were turned over to top real estate lawyers, carefully contesting every unauthorized transfer and mortgage adjustment. That process was slow and meticulous, requiring patience grounded in decades of practice. Every piece of evidence scrutinized, every claim verified. As seeds of doubt took root in the legal framework they depended on, their hold on the property started to crumble. The financial audits grew in scope as forensic accountants weaved through years of income and expenditures, uncovering loans taken without any transparency and assets deployed without permission. The web they had spun began to unravel under the weight of cold, unyielding scrutiny. Through every confrontation and challenge, I maintained a poised exterior. When Mark showed up one evening, anger and desperation flashing in his eyes, I met his fury with steady calm. I refused to be baited into arguments or rash accusations. Instead, I responded with measured words and silent resolve, signaling that I had no intention of escalating to the level of personal attacks or emotional pleas. I preserved my dignity and clarity, letting the strength of evidence and steadfast patience speak for themselves. Their once confident front began to crack. The easy assurance of control gave way to whispered urgencies, backroom dealings, and a crumbling facade of stability. I observed, dispassionately yet keenly, as their desperation grew. The alliances they relied on frayed under pressure. The fraudulent structures shuddered under weighty inspection. There was a strange solace in this slow dismantling, a reaffirmation that justice unfolds not in bursts of fury, but in quiet, methodical steps. Each document questioned, every irregularity revealed, echoed the same disciplined dedication that had carried me through decades of complex projects. At times, I sought refuge in the quieter corners of the house, the kitchen where Maria's laughter once filled the air, the dining room where stories and laughter mingled like sweet wine. These memories were not merely nostalgia, they became beacons, affirming the values I was fighting to uphold: respect, integrity, and loyalty. I shared discreet conversations with old family friends still loyal to the ideals of our family, whose quiet support lent strength to my cause. Their stories of similar struggles echoed quietly in my mind, reminding me that betrayal was a wound many bore, yet resilience could mend even the deepest fractures. Mark's wife, too, was a focus of my resolve. She was no bystander in this decay, but an architect of it, aiding and abetting the reckless behavior, fostering an atmosphere of entitlement. Their partnership was a knot I intended to unravel with the same determination I applied to every other challenge. Over the months, the landscape shifted. Walls of confidence they'd built crumbled with each legal move and financial freeze. Deeds frozen, assets sealed, unauthorized transfers blocked. The house, once threatened by reckless hands, stood strong again. Not physically changed, but fortified in the realm that mattered now, justice and truth. The strain was real. Exhaustion crept in during the quiet hours. The emotional weight was heavy on my shoulders. But resignation was not an option. Every small victory was a promise kept, to myself,
to those sacrifices, and to the legacy I was sworn to protect. I recalled that night months before when I first confronted Mark. My voice was firm, my words precise, laying bare the truth I refused to ignore. It was the point of no return, when grief was set aside in favor of decisive action. Since then, every legal petition filed, every financial discovery disclosed, was a brick laid with care in a new foundation. A foundation born from experience, discipline, and a newfound inner strength. The path had been long and fraught, but through it all, my dedication never wavered. I had transformed from a wounded father to a strategist, a guardian of a legacy stretching beyond myself and beyond the fragile fabric of a single family. At last, one snowy evening, I found a moment to pause, hands wrapped around a warm cup, gazing out at the softened world beyond my window. Outside, all was calm and still, yet inside, a steady flame burned, a flame of hope, quiet but resolute. This fight, still unfinished, was no longer one of sheer endurance, but of measured triumph. I was not just reclaiming assets or legal rights, I was restoring the very meaning of respect and loyalty that had been so carelessly abandoned. I was building something lasting, both for myself and for the family I refused to lose. And as the snow blanketed the world, I felt that, finally, justice was beginning to flourish once more. The moment I began to enact the plan, the atmosphere around me shifted. What had previously simmered beneath the surface now escalated into a tense battle of wills, a confrontation fought not with fists, but with legal letters, frozen accounts, and unwavering resolve. The first tangible act was simple yet profound. I revoked all financial permissions Mark and his wife held over family accounts and assets that were rightly shared. The bank manager, a trusted acquaintance from better days, helped expedite the closures and transfers with discretion, understanding the delicacy of the situation. It felt like reclaiming a lost piece of myself, not stolen by force, but surrendered through neglect and entitlement. I moved quickly yet carefully, ensuring every action was deliberate, leaving no room for Mark to maneuver without confrontation or exposure. The first time Mark realized the access had been cut, his shock was unmistakable. I had not anticipated an immediate apology or change of heart, but the faltering confidence in his voice when he called was a small victory. "Walter, what's going on? Why can't I access the account?" My response was calm, resolute. "Mark, I've revoked your privileges until we clarify the misuse of funds and the legal discrepancies concerning property ownership." His frustration boiled over, a mixture of anger and disbelief that I maintained a steady hand against. "You're making a mistake. We run this family too." "We are bound by law and responsibility," I replied evenly. "Until those are respected, privileges can't be assumed." That conversation was a mere precursor to the waves that followed. With legal counsel guiding my moves, I initiated formal actions, revisiting property titles, engaging in thorough audits, and sounding alarms within financial institutions. Every document, every transaction, every loan and asset was examined and challenged where irregularities appeared. Mark and his wife responded with bewildered defiance. Threats and ultimatums flew, anger fueled by a sense of entitlement that made them reckless. They sought confrontations, not with strategy but with noise, hoping to unsettle me. But I was unmoved. My training as an engineer had ingrained a patience that now proved invaluable. Instead of reacting emotionally, I analyzed each challenge, anticipated countermoves, and responded with precision. Where they hurled accusations or tried intimidation, I met silence or carefully chosen words that exposed their recklessness without giving away my own hand. Their attempts to coerce me faltered as I systematically closed each door they tried to open illicitly. The property deeds, frozen by legal injunctions I helped enact, stripped away their ability to leverage the house or other shared assets. Hidden debts emerged in the investigation. Debts they had hoped to bury or deny, now confronted with irrefutable evidence. Over time, their control slipped through their fingers like sand. They moved from arrogance to panic, desperation growing with every document examined and every account scrutinized. Late-night calls from their lawyers seeking leniency met firm refusals from mine. Though the battle was legal and financial, it felt intensely personal. I recalled the sacrifices that had paved this road. The late nights working overtime so Mark could attend the college he now dismissed. The mortgage payments made ahead of schedule to cover unexpected expenses. The family meals prepared with love even when fatigue weighed heavily. This was no longer merely about rights or assets. It was about restoring respect where entitlement had taken root. It was about reminding those who had forgotten that everything had cost something: effort, patience, love. My calm defiance was a fortress. Preserve the original language of the text, making sure no misstep compromised the justice I sought. Sleep grew elusive on some nights, tension knotting my muscles, but each small victory solidified my purpose. There were moments when Mark confronted me in person, his expression hard but flashing uncertainty beneath. "You don't have to do this, Dad. We can work something out." I met his gaze with quiet strength. "Work demands responsibility, Mark. It cannot be based on assumptions or entitlement. The path forward must respect that." His gaze faltered before he walked away, leaving a silence heavier than words. My wife's absence, the gentle partner who had shared these years of sacrifice, was felt deeply in those moments. I imagined what she would say, how she would counsel patience tempered with resolve. That thought became a silently burning beacon, guiding me through the solitary fight. I embraced the methodical approach, each legal instrument carefully executed. Every financial move deliberately crafted to ensure I maintained control without overexposure. The strategy was to wear down resistance through precision, to dismantle unlawful control piece by piece. Friends and confidants often checked in quietly, their support a balm amid the stress. They echoed my belief that justice required endurance. "Remember," one said, "it's a marathon, not a sprint. Your patience will be your strength." And patience I had in abundance. The house itself seemed to respond to this renewed order. Where once walls echoed with silent disappointment, now they held a quiet dignity, anchored by the certainty of rightful stewardship. The Christmas tree I hadn't yet removed stood like a sentinel of hope and tradition, its lights flickering under the gentle influence of restored order. One afternoon, as I reviewed the latest audit reports with my legal team, I was struck by how far we'd come. The shells of mismanaged assets lay exposed, replaced by gradually strengthening claims grounded in truth. This was no longer a shadowy contest, but a clear path toward restoration. I understood fully that this journey was not about vengeance. It was about balance, about justice sustained by intellect and tempered by years of wisdom. The reckless disregard that had threatened to tear apart the fabric of my family was being met with discipline and resolve. There was no room for anger, only focus. There was no place for rashness, only strategy. Through it all, I was steady, like the foundation stone of this house itself. And as the days passed, the weight of my fight bore fruit quietly but certainly. Mark's attempts to resist, legal maneuvers, confrontational encounters, desperate demands, fell flat against my unwavering preparation. The process was draining, a slow unspooling of conflict that required every ounce of my endurance. Still, the satisfaction of each small victory, securing another asset, blocking another unauthorized move, reminded me that patience was a weapon as formidable as any. None of this had to be public. It was a war fought behind closed doors, legal filers and phone calls. Only those involved knew the depths of this quiet storm. But in that stillness, I stood firm. no longer the passive provider or the wounded father, but a man reclaiming his family's honor through intellect and unwavering calm. And as the months stretched on, the tide turned unmistakably in my favor, a turning point shaped by calculated resolve that no burst of anger could have achieved. The day of reckoning arrived not with thunder and fury, but with the quiet, unyielding weight of truth laid bare. The room where we convened was stark and cold, far from the warmth of family dinners and holiday traditions that once filled these walls.
As I stood before those gathered, faces once familiar, now clouded with uncertainty and guilt, I felt the full burden of every sacrifice and expectation I had carried through the years pressed gently but firmly upon my shoulders. There was no grand declaration, no need for dramatics. The paper in my hand was my voice, the evidence meticulously compiled and unassailable. I presented the facts with calm authority. Forged documents, unauthorized financial transfers, debts accrued without consent. Each revelation struck at the core of the fabric that had once bound us, exposing fractures so deep they could no longer be ignored. Mark's defenses flared briefly, words raised in anger and denial, but their force was waning, the facade of confidence cracking under the cold scrutiny. His wife offered no support, her downcast eyes speaking volumes of regret and complicity. I spoke plainly, without rancor. This confrontation is not born of vengeance, but of necessity. Trust has been broken.
Responsibility neglected. To move forward, justice must be restored and respect rebuilt. The silence that followed was heavy, thick with unspoken truths and the uncomfortable weight of accountability. It was clear that the path ahead would be fraught with challenges, but this moment marked a crucial turning point, the acknowledgement of wrongs that demanded redress. The weeks that followed were relentless. Legal proceedings, financial audits, negotiations, each demanding patience and unwavering resolve. I orchestrated every step with the meticulous care of an engineer fine-tuning a complex machine, ensuring no detail was overlooked, no avenue unexplored. The family's financial mismanagement unfolded layer by layer. Loans taken without my consent, assets leveraged recklessly, property documents manipulated, all laid bare under the unforgiving light of investigation. The home I had built with patient hands and steady work stood threatened, yet through determined effort, I safeguarded what was rightfully ours. Confrontations with Mark became less frequent but more charged with unspoken tension. His entitlement met with my steadfast calm, his attempts at deflection countered by facts and legal safeguards. He was no longer the son I had nurtured, but a man reckoning with the consequences of his choices. Friends and family watched from the sidelines, some extending quiet support, others withholding judgment as they observed the slow unraveling of a once unshakable bond. The emotional toll was undeniable. Scars formed where love and betrayal had clashed, yet beneath the surface a new understanding took root, one where respect was no longer given freely but earned through accountability. The house, harboring memories of laughter and shared moments, became a symbol of resilience. Its walls no longer echoed disappointment, but stood as silent witnesses to a fight for justice and restoration. I maintained routines, small acts of normalcy that tethered me amidst chaos. A cup of tea in the evening light, the gentle glow of the Christmas tree left standing as a testament to hope amid upheaval. As months passed, the tide inexorably shifted. Legal victories accumulated, accounts were frozen, deeds restored, debts repaid. Mark's resistance, though fierce at times, gradually gave way to reluctant acceptance. The house was no longer contested ground, but reclaimed territory, secured through thoughtful strategy rather than brute force. I understood that this was not merely a legal or financial triumph, but a restoration of dignity, a reclaiming of the principles that had defined my life and family. Justice, tempered by patience and intellect, had prevailed where anger and entitlement failed. The final reckoning was quiet, a culmination not of spectacle but solemn acknowledgement. The family, fractured yet present, faced the reality of their choices. Rebuilding would require time, humility, and effort from all involved. Though the journey ahead remained uncertain, the foundation for renewal was laid. In reflecting on this ordeal, I grasped a profound truth. Respect is earned. Loyalty must be constant, and justice, though slow, is unrelenting. Where once I was a man wounded and betrayed, I now stood as the architect of a new legacy, one forged not only in blood, but in steadfast resolve, reasoned action, and unwavering calm. The seasons would change, and with them, perhaps, the healing would begin. Yet in this moment, enveloped in the quiet strength of a fight justly won, I found a peace born not of forgetting, but of justice restored. The house settled into a new rhythm, quieter now, yet filled with a subtle strength that spoke of resilience and hope. It stood as a silent witness to the long journey we had endured, a journey that had tested the bonds of family, the limits of trust, and the depths of patience. Each creak of its floorboards and every tender glow from the lingering Christmas tree lights whispered stories of sacrifice, loss, and the enduring will to rebuild. Evenings often found me lost in thought by the window, tracing the familiar outlines of the house against the darkening sky. The subtle warmth it gave off was a balm to my weary spirit, reminding me of the life and love once shared within these walls. The tree's soft flicker symbolized more than holiday cheer. It was a testament to traditions preserved amidst stormy upheavals, a quiet promise that some things endure beyond the grasp of betrayal. In these moments, memories of Maria surfaced, her laughter, her unwavering support, the gentle way she held our family together. Though her presence was now an echo, it filled the spaces of my solitude with an unspoken strength. She had shown me that love is steadfast, not merely through proximity, but through steadfast devotion and protection. Lessons I clung to fiercely in this ongoing battle to restore what had been lost. The scars left by Mark's betrayal etched themselves deeply, reminders of wounds that time alone could not erase. Yet these scars no longer bled openly. They were hardened, a testament to resilience born from pain. They shaped my understanding of trust and the unforgiving nature of responsibility we owe those closest to us. Mark remained a complicated figure in my life, a reflection of fractured ties and uneasy reconciliations. Our conversations became sparse and cautious, marked by a civil distance that neither of us fully bridged. Forgiveness was a fragile concept, one requiring slow, deliberate effort and the quiet willingness to face past wrongs honestly. The path ahead of us was uncertain, but the acknowledgement of truth had planted a seed even amidst fractured soil. As I reflected on the decades of sacrifice, nights spent working long after exhaustion had set in, the careful balancing of bills to provide for education and a stable home, I recognized these efforts as the foundation of the legacy I now protected. That legacy was more than bricks and mortar. It was a covenant of values, a silent contract of integrity and dedication. True victory, I realized, lay not in material restitution alone, but in the restoration of honor and respect. It was in the slow mending of trust fractured by human failings and the reclamation of dignity that defines us beyond possessions or debts. The house, once merely a shelter, had become a sanctuary of justice restored and promises kept. Though scars both visible and invisible remained, I faced the future fortified by hard-earned wisdom and unwavering commitment. Respect is not granted by default. It must be earned and carefully guarded. Loyalty is a delicate bond, nurtured through truth and accountability. In these resolute truths, I found a peace that settled deep within me, quiet and steady, a break from the tumult. It was not a peace that dims memory or diminishes past pain, but one born of clarity and fulfillment, knowing that justice, slow and deliberate, had finally been served.
Outside, the seasons changed in their eternal rhythm. Winter's quiet chill thawed into the soft bloom of spring, the turning of leaves marking cycles of growth and renewal. Inside, cushioned by these natural rhythms, I nurtured a cautious hope. A hope that, like the seasons, the family I had fought to protect might find its own renewal. I had built this home once through sacrifice, patience, and unwavering intention. Now I preserved a legacy of respect, one forged not solely by blood, but by the stern commitment to justice and the enduring strength of reasoned resolve. In the stillness of this moment, wrapped in the quiet dignity of a battle well fought, I embraced a peace not born of forgetting, but of the restoration of what was rightfully mine.